Hi everyone. Hi everyone. I'm here with Derek Noonan, and as you know, Derek's often with Mississauga and Brampton rallies and part of the Tyrant Patrol. And as am I, and right behind us is the Black Flag.
Right.
So Black Flag Media.
That's it.
So today I thought, Arif Virani is our new Justice Minister. And we didn't know too much about him. He seemed kind of quiet, and thought, well, let's have a look at what he's been doing. And I came across a speech that he made in the House of Commons in February of 2022. And I thought that would be a really interesting way to introduce him. But he kind of jumped the gun and introduced himself yesterday, dropping that F-bomb.
F-bomb at Pierre Polyev.
So he's kind of made himself well known before we've introduced him, but we are gonna put this video on today, and it is his speech, February 17th, 2022, and it's a motion for confirmation of the declaration of emergency. And so we're gonna talk about that. Do you want to say something beforehand?
Sure.
Okay.
So this will probably make you pretty upset listening to this. So at the time, he's the Justice Minister now. He's recently took over for David Lametti. 2 weeks now he's into the position. When he's speaking here, he's actually the Minister for Small Business and Economic...
I think he was the Minister for Trade,
Trade,
the Secretary of Trade.
Secretary of Trade.
Yeah.
So after this, that ministry that he had was broken into two pieces. So they made a small business minister, which is... Minister Valdez in Mississauga, and then Mary Yang added the international business affairs to her portfolio. But like I said, you're going to listen to him, you're going to get really upset with what he says constitutes bringing in this act. So I guess we'll listen to him first.
We'll listen to him, then maybe we'll do a thing afterwards.
And then we'll discuss it.
And as we all know, that the Emergency Act has been ruled by Justice Mosley as unreasonable but unconstitutional. So let's have a listen to watch his speech, and then we'll come back to you guys later.
Perfect.
Okay.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Here. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll be sharing my time with the member from Surrey Centre. I rise today, Mr. Speaker, with some humility. I rise to speak not on behalf of a particular political party, because I firmly believe this issue cannot be partisan today. I rise not as a representative of a particular community, because I don't think this is a regional issue that we're discussing today. I rise today, Mr. Speaker, in all sincerity, as a member of Parliament, as a member of this chamber, the House of Commons, committed to serving the public, to serving all Canadians in a genuine effort to do what is best for our country. At this stage, I firmly believe that the only way to resolve the present threat that is facing this country is to declare a public order emergency under the Emergencies Act. Mr. Speaker, I want to start by talking about the Charter. Let me state at the outset that the right to freedom of expression is sacrosanct in this country. It's entrenched in Section 2B of the Charter for a reason, because it is the hallmark of our democracy, indeed of any democracy, is the ability for citizens to voice their discontent, to challenge authority, and to seek change. I don't deny any of this. To the contrary, I vigorously defend it, Mr. Speaker. I also don't deny that the people gathered outside this very chamber right now, who have been on the streets of Ottawa for it is now 21 days, have legitimate grievances. Criticisms of my government, of my party, perhaps even of me personally, which they have every right to air. But, Mr. Speaker, in our democracy, freedom of expression, while sacrosanct, is not absolute. This charter protection under Section 2B extends towards lawful, peaceful protest. The charter does not protect illegal, violent blockades. And it is the latter, unfortunately, what this protest has devolved into. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to reference Ottawa. How do I substantiate this assertion I've just made? I substantiate it with the evidence I've gathered with my own eyes and from the accounts of other parliamentarians that have been shared with me. Far from seeing people exercising their constitutional rights to disagree vigorously with the government, we have seen instead intimidation, threats, and harassment. We've seen deliberate nuisances being created by truck horn blowing at all hours of the day and night, rendering the city effectively uninhabitable for local residents. We've seen open displays of hatred such as swastikas and Confederate flags and acts of direct hatred where windows are smashed on coffee shops that dare to fly the pride flag. We've seen the desecration of national monuments, including our National War Memorial. We've seen deliberate efforts to block the movement of people and goods by people intentionally disabling large vehicles and trucks by things like activating their air brakes or actually removing the tires from their vehicle. We've seen death threats then follow towards an Ottawa tow trucking company accused of being complicit with police efforts to remove such disabled vehicles. We've seen the shuttering of businesses in the entire downtown core, impeding residents' ability to work, which parenthetically I would say is puzzling, Mr. Speaker, to say the least, from protesters who claim to eschew lockdowns, having themselves caused Ottawa's downtown to enter into a lockdown for a period of now 3 weeks. We've seen intimidation and threats of the media. Again, ironic for those who would be more ardent defenders of freedom of expression than even me in terms of what I've already articulated. We've seen the active sabotage of 911 emergency call lines and even an attempted arson, Mr. Speaker. The protest, which ostensibly started out about vaccine mandates, has morphed into what resembles an occupation of the city by people who have openly declared, Mr. Speaker, on the public record that they are seeking to overthrow the government. That constitutes a complete breakdown of public order in Ottawa. And despite efforts from the Ottawa Police Services, Mr. Speaker, law and order in the nation's capital has been impossible to maintain. But the evidence that I'm outlining here, Mr. Speaker, extends beyond the nation's capital. You've heard reference to the borders, and I want to address this now. What commenced as a protest targeting this city and this parliament has emerged as a concerted effort to block our national border crossings and impede the flow of people and goods. Foreign entities, openly and publicly in Texas and Florida and other parts of the United States and indeed other nations, have openly declared their sympathy with the blockades and admitted to sending money and resources to help the blockades continue. Today, the Anti-Defamation League showed a result of their analysis of the Give, Send, Go website and found 1,100 people in the United States who supported the January 6th insurrection of last year actually donated money under Give, Send, Go to these blockades, Mr. Speaker. Just let that settle in for a moment in terms of what the motivations are for such types of people. The blockades that have emerged around the country are deliberately targeting critical infrastructure. We know about what's happened at the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, Detroit. That multi-day siege, Mr. Speaker, now I'm wearing my hat as a Parliamentary Secretary for International Trade, on Canada's busiest border crossing alone resulted in the suspension of nearly $400 million in daily trade between Canada and the United States, the cancellation of shifts at multiple auto plants in southern Ontario, and an intervention by President Biden and the Governor of Michigan showing that confidence in Canada as a safe place to invest, do business, and trade with is starting to erode. Blockades have occurred in Surrey, in Emerson, at Coutts, Alberta. And what should be startlingly alarming for every person in this chamber and for every Canadian watching right now is that when the RCMP went to clear the Coutts border crossing, they made 13 arrests, including laying charges for conspiracy to commit murder. Wow. Now, I'm going to say that again, Mr. Speaker, conspiracy to commit murder, and they found firearms, ammunition, and body armor, Mr. Speaker. Wow. That bore out certainly my worst fears, but I think all of our worst fears, Mr. Speaker, that blockade protesters were armed and preparing for violent confrontation with law enforcement. Mr. Speaker, the violence is continuing to ratchet up. We've had bomb threats at a Vancouver hospital, suspicious packages and language about hanging members of Parliament being sent to colleagues of mine from Nova Scotia. Why am I laying this all out, Mr. Speaker, in such excruciating detail? I'm laying it out because there's a legal test that must be met when you're doing something that has not been done ever under this legislation or even in this country under antecedent legislation in 52 years. The test is high, as it should be, when you're considering a statute which permits temporarily for the suspension of civil liberties. What is that test, Mr. Speaker? The test is entrenched in Section 3 of the Emergencies Act. It says a national emergency is an urgent and critical situation of a temporary nature that seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians and is of such proportions or nature as to exceed the capacity or authority of a province to deal with it, or one that seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada. Mr. Speaker, it is my fundamental belief that this high legal threshold has been met in this case. when you have a blockade laying siege to an entire city for 21 days and counting, intimidating, harassing, and threatening locals, rendering a city uninhabitable, you're endangering the safety of Canadians. When those blockades limit the ability of medical first responders to respond quickly to emergencies, you're endangering the lives of those on the other ends of those 911 calls. When factions with weapons and ammunition are blockading borders, you're directly endangering the lives of Canadians. When groups are deliberately blocking trade corridors with our single largest trading partner, grinding our border traffic to a halt, you're threatening the ability of the federal government to preserve our sovereignty and our economic security. Mr. Speaker, these are important. In the last 2 minutes, what I want to do is address some of the general objections we've been hearing, not just today, but prior to this. To those who say there's an overreach here, I say 5 things, 5 checks that are important. 1, everything done by a government under the Emergencies Act must be done in accordance with the Charter. That's entrenched in the preamble. All declarations are time limited, 30 days, no more. In fact, it may be less, and hopefully it will be less in this context. Third, the very act of declaring an emergency under the declaration must be reviewed by a committee of all members of Parliament and senators from all parties. Fourth, the exercise of powers under the declaration must be reviewed by that committee. And fifth, following the end of an emergency, a full inquiry must be held. What we are doing, Mr. Speaker, is not a power grab. It is not the invocation of the War Measures Act. We are simply giving the RCMP the power to enforce local laws and work quickly with local law enforcement. We are not calling in the armed forces. We are not putting the RCMP or any other police force under the control of the government. Policing operational decisions remain independent, as they must in any democracy. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to end with the right to protest, because people have said, what about my children's right to protest? And I take this very seriously, because I myself have taken children of mine to protest. This law talks about the right of lawful protest.
Say that again on film.
Oh, I said that it's important for us to be out here because so they remember later on that protest and marching is part of our inherent rights. So
Very
that
much so.
if they ever try to stop it, they'll have something to remember and said, I was there, I remember that we used to do this in order to make our point across.
And your whole family was in Ottawa for the truck convoy, all of you?
Yeah.
Wow.
They were
look at-
smaller.
Look at this beautiful family. That were you? Did you like the truck convoy? Yeah. Oh wow! Look at that's so sweet. Did you like the truck convoy? She's sweet. Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Contemplating are measures that would address or prohibit public assembly that is a threat to leading to a breach of the peace. We are specifically carving out the right of lawful advocacy, protest, and dissent. And Mr. Speaker, for those that say that the threats have been addressed, what I say to you is that Windsor had an attempted blockade yesterday, and that we know that protesters are returning to the Quebec National Assembly on the 19th. I'm going to conclude with a sincere undertaking to the members of this chamber and to all Canadians that I will do everything in my power to ensure that this act lasts for only as long as is absolutely necessary. I will do everything in my power to ensure that there is no overbreath and then to ensure that charter rights are always fundamentally protected. All members of Parliament should strive for nothing less.
Yeah.
What did you think of that?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people are angry like I am. It was kind of first thing that you got to remember now. We're talking on the day after he was talking about Coots, about the attempted murder. So all of that is off the table now. So literally everything that he said that he thinks constitutes it has been proven that it didn't exist. Now, if you go back to the ruling that we had, the federal court literally decimated it. They started from beginning to end. He ruled that even the circumstances didn't dictate having the Emergency Act put in. And then when he closes, he even uses statutes to say that
Justice Mosley, you're talking about?
Justice Mosley, to prove that it was unconstitutional and it didn't bear doing. And then he even used examples. I meant, without it being called, the protests in Windsor were removed under the existing power of the laws that they had there. And then it was also interesting too that he says we would not use the armed forces. Well, the armed forces clearly came out in front of this and said no, under no circumstances will we be going in. Did you want to kind of talk about some of the key ones? I thought that he'd bring up. Yeah, sure.
I mean, certainly.
So obviously the arson we know about, store smash. That was just frivolous. Well, one of the key things too. Now, this is really interesting to me. Is he? This is coming from a company, from a government. They accuse us of foreign entities being involved. Well, this government's been using the CCP to win elections, and they have the nerve to say that themselves. Now, they keep going back onto the 400 million. This is, and in the Supreme Court, this is what I think that they're going to use, is that the country was actually under economic threat. And they keep saying that this was law. That hasn't been proven. And don't forget, we were in the middle of COVID anyway. So obviously trade was going to be down in the first place. So that I'm sure that's what they're going to take into the Supreme Court. They're going to probably slowly go on that it was an economic threat, and it clearly wasn't.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Excuse me, I'm glad you brought that up because Arif Virani has stood next to and has declared, along with Chrystia Freeland and the Liberal Party, that they will be taking Justice Mosley's ruling to the Supreme Court in appeal. Well, I don't know if they go to a Supreme Court right away, but they will be appealing his ruling. So
yeah. And normally from the federal court, that's it. They won't accept an appeal on it, so they'd be forced to take it to the Supreme Court. The desecrations of the monuments. What are you talking about? I saw more desecrations. There was no desecrations of any monument while the convoy protest was on, but their own left-wing supporters. Reason why we have the Sir John A. Macdonald building statue in Toronto boarded up was because it was covered with paint. Countless other ones were covered with paint through it. Some were torn down. So why doesn't say there's nothing? Never has he spoken out about that. No, kind of going back to other things now too. He's put himself in a bit of a precarious situation. So now he is a lawyer, and he did state non-facts. Now what will happen is how this will play out is I know anyone who hasn't. This is February the 7th, February 8th. If you're in Ottawa, make sure that you get your statements of claim in anyway. You have till the 8th. But what's happening right now is there is a massive lawsuit actually being arranged, and it will be filed, which would be of greater things, which will be going in very shortly on money aspects. So they're going to be suing the federal government. So as you notice, there's a statement of lies and everything that they've used. This goes into court as well. We will be able to use collection of more evidence, ask them for disclosure as well on where the communication went with this. So that's very, very key. So he's in a little bit of a precarious, and the other reason why he's in a little bit of trouble is if you actually even just look up their own ethics laws that MPs and other governments are supposed to be involved in. He didn't act very ethically there, especially using unsubstantiated evidence. And then even Justin in 2015, the open and accountable government. There's no accountability, and the government's not open. Right?
no kidding.
And all we have is lies, and as JFK says, is the notion of secrets in government is absolutely redundant. There shouldn't be any secrets, and that's what we see here. And then lastly, he compares this to January 6th insurrection. Well, down in the States, there's no evidence of it being of an insurrection, and we find out everything's falling apart. So, was our government in tandem with the U.S. on this? Because just last week we found out on the January 6th there was supposedly a pipe bomb. Well, we realized that was a D.C. cop that planted the pipe bomb. So did Justin and his government plan on doing the same thing as well, or displaying it as the same thing as well? Well, that constitutes as conspiracy. So a lot's going to come out, especially after we get a chance at them in court after all of this is done. Maybe get some discovery, and then we'll go on even more on the offensive.
Well, I, of course, along with millions of other Canadians, including you, were thrilled that Justice Mosley declared and ruled the Emergency Act as being unconstitutional. What I found kind of funny when I was searching around for news reports about it, their headlines often mostly said the ruling was found unreasonable, which was one of the things he said.
Yeah.
But very few actually said in their headline unconstitutional.
Correct.
So I did find True North did, and I think National Post put unconstitutional in their headline. I just want to say that clip that I put in of the family with the young kids. That was in Toronto. I forget the date, but the second million person march that happened, that one was in Toronto, and I happened to be there and spoke to that family, which is kind of obvious that they're pretty sweet. And what he said, that dad said about how important it is to teach not only you yourself to the inherent rights to protest, but teach our children to
100%.
also participate. And they were at the truck convoy, these young little children, and they obviously had fun, and we've all seen the pictures of the kids on the bouncy castles and playing hockey and doing what kids do, and people having fun. And so all this intimidation, harassment, threats, all this things that Virani has said, and then many others have said, just never seem to prove true. There's never any evidence. They never show evidence like, oh, there's that going on. I have evidence. Where there's hundreds and thousands of hours of video and still photographs of people having fun and enjoying themselves. And the flag thing, it was real. Was a swastika, and there was a Confederate flag.
Yeah.
But what I know, that Confederate flag was seen by protesters, and that guy was asked to move away, which I believe he did.
Yeah, they were both operatives, and we still don't know, like, that swastika flag. We obviously forced them away. There was one that was actually more or less stating that Justin had become a Nazi too, but either way, the whole crowd forced them away. We'll probably find out. Who knows?
I think Alexia Lavoie did a really good piece about, like, a real good investigation into that flag. It's on Rebel News.
Yeah.
I mean, it was quite a while ago. You'd have to dig around to find it. But she did a real good investigation as to, here's the guy and he's going up those stairs. How are they getting that film of him? She really investigated. So that's worth having a look at.
Definitely.
Yeah, but they use that all the time. Like, and I've asked you this before, but as much as, of course, I wouldn't fly a swastika flag or any of that, and I certainly, think it's, not good, but I don't believe it's illegal. So if somebody's flying a certain flag and it's not illegal, it is.
So well, we've seen the swastika itself show up in some of the Palestinian rallies as well.
Well, it's always that, one rule for thee and one rule for me, or whatever it is.
Exactly.
Of course, yeah.
Well, the swastika itself, I mean, everyone thinks of it in the Nazi tomes, but that goes back centuries. It's just a Buddhist symbol for eternity.
Yeah.
And it was just misused.
Yeah. But it's not illegal. My point being,
sure.
Unless I'm wrong, and it is, but I don't.
Well, they don't
it's
allow it
illegal.
on Parliament Hill.
Okay.
And
Fair
the other
enough.
flag that they don't allow on Parliament Hill, ironically, is not the Confederate. It's the Thunderbird.
Oh.
Yeah, those are the two flags that they don't allow.
Why don't they allow the Thunderbird?
Well, probably for the same connotation that, although the opposite meaning of the Thunderbird is they think it is a violent revolution, which is the exact opposite of meant of the Thunderbird.
Oh, okay.
So those are the two things that the two flags that they won't allow on Parliament Hill, believe it or not.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting that they can even actually say that. If they're not illegal, why can they say? What gives them the right to say they are not allowed?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't understand that.
Yeah.
But food for thought for another day. Anything we want to say to wrap this up?
Yeah, I'll say it's very important to realize. So if you go back all through history, now you're going to look at when countries turn. So when you have either a peaceful democratic country or just a peaceful country, when they turn to some sort of autocrat form of government or tyranny or dictatorship or what have you, it always begins with the country themselves beating their own people. Or vilifying a segment of the population. That's where it always begins. So when you come into power, like the ideal form of leadership is you have to be, when you come into power, you got to be pragmatic in the sense, right? Always good leaders never have a direction. They always go to negotiating or talking amongst before they claim the direction. But here was a situation where Liberals showed their true colors, that they didn't like a particular segment of the population, and they were going to impose force on that population. But it was also the time where he, basically the leader, says, I'm only going to be the leader for the people that follow us. Right? So that was a huge change in our history. And when you notice, when you go all through time like that, it always leads to either tyranny or the country regains itself. So that in that aspect, you have to remember that day in Ottawa. Now, whether we'll live in infamy or whether in years to come it will be, we're commemorating it now, but in years to come will we be celebrating it?
Right.
And that's
a good point.
That's
because the history can be rewritten also very easily.
And you can tell. I meant
Mm-hmm.
they constantly want to try to the elimination of our statues, the renaming of this, the new education. Our history's not being taught.
Right. Well, speaking of Ottawa
happen?
and commemorating the date, I think it's a good time to talk about, just to remind people how important it is to commemorate during this period of time. Like we are in truck convoy season.
Yeah,
we want to use that term, but we are in the truck convoy time from basically January 28th, 29th up until February 19, 20. I call that truck convoy season. And of course, the date that we will be commemorating the truck convoy is February 17th. And I say we as in you, me, and a bunch of other people will be in Ottawa. I plan to be there for the 14th because I was there last year also, and standing for that date because that was the date that they invoked the Emergency Act. So I want to say thank you to the truckers. Thank you very, very much. And to all the people on the bridges and the side of the roads and the emailers, everybody. It was an amazing, absolutely amazing representation of coming together of Canadians.
It was.
It was so Canadian with the flags and the singing, and it touched us all and wherever we were at the time. So I, for one, think it's really important to be in Ottawa during that time. 100%. So I will be there.
I think it was probably the first time in Canadian history that people on Canadian soil felt afraid to go out. If you can believe that. Felt afraid to go out.
Yeah. And we don't want that to continue. So we have to hold this line. And that's what we continue to do. Hold the line.
Yeah. Hold the line.
All right.
Fight the ideology and freedom.
Freedom, everybody.